الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله ولو آمن أهل الكتاب لكان خيرا لهم منهم المؤمنون وأكثرهم الفاسقون أما بعد. Just a few days ago, our country celebrated its Independence Day on July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence was adopted, declaring the United States of America to be an autonomous country free from the dictates of the British Empire. And if you remember in history class, the British Empire was so large at one point in time that it was said the sun never sets on the British Empire. Meaning that if on one part of the British Empire the sun was setting, in another part of the British Empire the sun would be rising. And yet today, ironically, the state of Britain is such that if you were to go to the average person on the street and ask them to identify Great Britain on the map, they would not be able to do so. Throughout the Quran, as you read it, you will find stories of previous nations and communities to whom Allah Azza wa Jal sent messengers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ رُسُلًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِمْ فَجَاءُوهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ فَانْتَقَمْنَا مِنَ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا. That indeed we sent before you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, messengers to their peoples, and they came to them with clear evidences. And then we punished those who were wrongdoers. We punished those who did wrong. Allah Azza wa Jalla, in fact, in many places in the Quran, He encourages us to travel around and see the remnants of the nations that came before us. There were many powerful, prosperous empires that rose up throughout history, and yet today there remains a few crumbling monuments reminding us that they too once existed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, He says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. He says, O Prophet, say, tell the people to travel in the land and see what was the end of those who denied the truth. In Surah An-Naml, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. That say, travel in the land and see what was the end of those who were wrongdoers. And just like the British Empire, these nations that were wiped out were also very successful and were thriving nations. And they were the superpowers of their time. Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us, informing us about them in the Quran, He says, أَوَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ كَانُوا أَشَدَّ مِنْهُمْ قُوَّةً وَأَثَارُوا الْأَرْضَ وَعَمَرُوهَا أَكْثَرَ مِمَّا عَمَرُوهَا. He says, do they not travel in the land and see what was the end of those who came before them? Those people were even stronger than them, and they cultivated the land even more than them, and they built more upon the land than they did. In Surah Al-Ghafir, Allah Azza wa Jalla informs us, He adds, He says, كَانُوا أَكْثَرَ مِنْهُمْ وَأَشَدَّ قُوَّةً وَآثَارٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ He says that those people that came before were even more in number than you are, and they were even stronger than you are, and they left more of a mark in the land than you did. However, Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us, فَمَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, that all of their achievements did them no good in the end. And the point of mentioning all of this is that today the United States of America is the superpower of the world, but if we take lesson from history, we know that eventually this too will come to an end. And this is an observation about the condition of nations, but we see the same pattern in our own lives. For example, Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us, الله الذي خلقكم من ضعف ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة ثم جعل من بعد قوة ضعفا وشيبة. That Allah is the one who created you from weakness, and then after weakness He gave you strength. And then after strength, again you became weak and old in age. And so our strength, our mental capabilities will rise and fall over the span of our lifetimes, such that a time will come in a person's life when he reaches a certain age that he will become like a child is, in the sense that a child is dependent upon a guardian, a caretaker, to take care of his needs. So too, man and woman will one day reach such an age that they too will become in need and dependent on others. The ayah in Surah Al-Isra, where Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah says in this verse that your Lord has decreed that you not worship anyone except for Him, and do not associate partners with Him, and show ihsan to your parents. Be good in your conduct with your parents. Here in this ayah, this verse, which is every parent's favorite verse in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla reminds us that just like our parents took care of us when we were young and dependent, a time will come when our parents, they too will become in need of us and dependent. And so just as they took care of us, it is our responsibility to take care of our parents once they reach that age. Allah Azza wa Jalla goes on in the ayah, and He says, إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرَ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. That if one or both of your parents reaches old age while they are with you, do not say uff to them. And uff means saying any word that shows impatience to them. وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا, and do not brush them off. وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا, and speak to them respectfully. And Allah keeps going on, He says, وَخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الظُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, that lower onto them the wing of humility out of mercy. وَقُلْ رَبِّ رَحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا, that say, O my Lord, have mercy on them, just as they took care of me when I was young. And so it's worth noting that Allah Azza wa Jal reminds us of the favor our parents had on us, so that we too are able to return that favor over time. And going back to the historical significance of this past week, we should all make an attempt to study and learn the history of this country. It may surprise you to know that Islam has a history with America that goes back all the way to Christopher Columbus. How so? Muslim rule existed in Spain for roughly 800 years, until 1492, when the last Muslim stronghold in Granada fell to Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II. And it was only after this event occurred that the king and queen, they finally agreed to sponsor Christopher Columbus's expedition. and which obviously led to the European discovery of the Western Hemisphere. And so it's highly probable that the money that was used to fund Christopher Columbus's expedition, his project, was the same money that was taken from the Muslim Caliphate in Granada. Because it was after this event occurred, in the very same year, in 1492, that Christopher Columbus sailed from Andalusia, which comes from the Arabic word Al-Andalus. And his journey eventually led to the colonization of America. And it's only fitting that today Christopher Columbus is buried, the cathedral where Christopher Columbus is buried in Spain was actually founded as a masjid. That building where he's buried was actually a masjid, and it was later converted into a church when Muslim rule ended. And so the significance of learning these ties is to solidify the fact that Muslims and Muslim influence are not alien to this country's history. We know for a fact that in 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was adopted, there were black slaves who were Muslims who were taken from Africa and brought to America. So quite literally, Muslims have been a part of American society since its very inception. In fact, we know that the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they included Muslims in their speech and included Muslims in the protection of religious freedom. We have documents of theirs where they refer to Muslims, they call them Mohammedans. That's the term that they use for Muslims. And one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, his name was Brandon Rush. He was also a friend of Thomas Jefferson. And he says that he would, quote, rather see the opinions of Confucius or Muhammad inculcated in the youth, rather than see them grow up wholly devoid of any religious principle. Religious freedom was one of the primary objectives of the early settlers who were escaping religious persecution in England. And that's why the very first amendment in the Constitution, the first Bill of Rights, is the right of every person to practice their religion, and ensuring that no law will be passed that limits a person's right to practice their religion. And Muslims are, of course, included under this protection. And so when we see instances of Islamophobia in political discourse, and we see extremist and deviant manifestations of Islamic teachings being used by groups and individuals to limit the rights of Muslims, we should be cognizant of the fact that this is at odds with the vision that the founding fathers had for this country. One of our responsibilities as Muslims in this country is to teach the people about Islam. We have the instruction of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ who said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah," that convey from me even if it's only one verse. And the reality is that most of our non-Muslim neighbors, friends, co-workers, and acquaintances know very little about Islam. They may have heard or seen something on the news or read something in a newspaper, but they lack knowledge on the beliefs and the fundamental tenets of Islam, of our religion. One of the most beautiful aspects of our religion is the emphasis it puts on the development of good character and manners. This aspect is so important that we have a narration from the Prophet ﷺ who is reported as having said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I was sent to perfect good characters. the importance of good conduct is especially relevant when it comes to the field of da'wah, of teaching other people about Islam. We have an ayah of the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jalla tells the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَظًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, that if you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, had been strict and stern and cold towards the people around you would have dispersed. And so just like you can have an amazing product, but if it's not presented and packaged attractively, then people will hesitate in buying it. So the example given is that if you have a sweet, right? If you're Arab, you have kanafa. If you're Desi, you have laddu and gulab jamun. If these sweets were put and packaged in a used tuna can, people would be very hesitant to try it. The same is the case when it comes to teaching people about Islam. So much so that the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, who was the most sincere, the most noble of people, he is being told that if you did not have good conduct, the people would not have even listened to you. And so I'll end with this quote, very famous quote, that says that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And the example of the Prophet ﷺ teaches this, that it's part of wisdom that you surround yourself and you package and you make yourself an example of good character. And once you've done that, then people will be ready to listen to what you have to say. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in good character and give us the knowledge and necessary qualities to teach people about this religion convincingly and compassionately. Ameen. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. One of the ways that we can manifest good manners right away is following the command, the ayah of Allah, where Allah says in Surah Al-Nisa, He says, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب والصاحب بالجنب وابن السبيل. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in this verse, worship Allah and do not associate any partners with Him. And with your parents show ihsan. And show ihsan to your relatives, to the orphans, to the poor, to the neighbor that is near and the neighbor that is far, to the companion who is at your side, and to the traveler. Many of our modern-day scholars claim that if Muslims practice this rule of our religion of showing ihsan to everyone, regardless if they are Muslim, non-Muslim, stranger or relative, young or old, that the misconceptions that people have about Islam would be removed. And the beauty of our religion is that in consumer society, when someone does something good, when a business is showing ihsan to its customers, it's doing it because it wants to increase its profits. Right? It's not doing it because of the person. It's doing it for themselves. But as Muslims, when we show ihsan to other people and we are good towards people, we do it for the sake of Allah only. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, He quotes believers that when they do good, they say, لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. That the believer, when he does good, he says to the person who he's helping, to the person who he's feeding, he says that I don't want anything from you. I don't want any reward or any recognition or Facebook photo or anything. All I want, all I seek is wajhillah, is Allah and Allah's pleasure. There's one thing that we can take from this khutbah. It should be the practice of showing ihsan to every person we meet. And the Prophet ﷺ was the perfect embodiment of this trait. I'd like to share one incident, inshallah, from the Prophet's life, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that shows this quality of his, the fact that the people around the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they all believed that they were the most beloved person to him. Due to the love that he would show to people, the attention that he would give people, the warmth with which he would meet people, every person thought that they were special. And so there's a narration of a companion, his name is Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu. And Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu, he, if you study Sirah, you would know that there was a time in the history of Islam when the people, the Muslims in Mecca, they had to flee from Mecca due to the persecution that they were facing from the Quraysh. And so they fled to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. And the disbelievers in Quraysh, they sent Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu, this very same person, to ask the king to return those Muslims back to them. The king, he refused. And so this same Sahabi, Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu, he accepted Islam in the 8th year of Hijrah. And in the narration that he himself transmits, he says that I came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and I said to him, Ayyun nas ahabbu ilayk? Who among the people is the most beloved to you? And the backdrop of the narration is that Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu, he was convinced that he was the most beloved person to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so obviously the Prophet, being a sadiq, being truthful, he answers truthfully. He says, Aisha radiallahu anha. Then Amr bin al-As, he clarifies, he's like, no, I meant from among the men. And so the Prophet ﷺ responds truthfully again, Abuha, her father, meaning referring to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And now Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu must have been thinking in his mind that, yeah, of course, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is pretty amazing, but maybe I'm in second place. And so he says, okay, who's the most beloved to you after him? And so the Prophet ﷺ responds, Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. And he goes on to list a number of people after him. And it's funny because in the narration, Umar bin al-As radiallahu anhu, he says that I stayed quiet after that out of fear that I would be the last person in that list. And so the purpose of sharing this narration is to show how beautiful the Prophet ﷺ's conduct must have been, how beautifully he must have treated every single person, that someone who was obviously not very close, he was not the most beloved person to the Prophet ﷺ, and yet he was convinced that he was the most beloved person to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to follow in the footsteps of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم واتقوه يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا وأقيموا الصلاة